I think as I was approaching the age 40, I started to kind of panic, you know, because you hear that your fertility, and being from a clinical background as a nurse practitioner, I was very aware that there's a point, you know, where it becomes very difficult to get pregnant. I had luckily frozen some eggs, but I had only done 2 rounds, and I think from the very beginning, I was very naive, as are a lot of women that go into this situation, whether you have a partner or if you're doing it alone, like I was. I was very naive. So I thought, that's fine. I'll bank those eggs. I'll find love. Everything will be fine. But then as 40 came along, I realized that that path was not really looking as straight and as I had expected. And I had always wanted to be a mother, and my parents were getting older. So it just sort of became this pressing thing that I felt like I needed to do something. So I tried to make embryos, you know, using what eggs I had left. I did some rounds of IUI, and it was just very bumpy. I didn't realize, you know, every time you would do a transfer and there was a failed attempt, you started the cycle over. So it was more money, more time. It was frustrating. And from the very beginning, I had a fibroid. It was tiny, tiny, tiny. It
Mm.
was kind of one of those things where it's fine, we'll watch it. But after I did every transfer or every attempt, I always had success. And so one was an early miscarriage called a chemical pregnancy, one failed to implant, one was a miscarriage, but you know, by the time we went to week 6, there was no heartbeat. So by the time I came around to the 4th, I was just running through all these eggs and these embryos, as well as time and money. And the wild card was this little fibroid. And we had been watching it. Unfortunately, mine was kind of in a place that was not inside the cavity, it was actually in the muscle. But I think, unfortunately, you know, if you think about your uterus as this perfect little home for an embryo, that was where questions started to get raised was, you know, is it causing some impediment to blood flow? And is the shape of the uterus being impacted? I mean, this little fibroid was less than 2 centimeters. It was tiny. And, you know, I had seen working in women's health fibroids that were the size of grapefruits, and these women were pregnant. So I was thinking, come on, this is ridiculous. It can't possibly be this fibroid. Um, so it came to the point where I just decided if I was going to continue to do this journey, which was very important to me, that I had to remove the fibroid. And so I did it. They went through and they removed the fibroid. It was, I think, 1.75 centimeters. It was tiny. It was the smallest little fibroid. But we will never know for sure. But the next attempt, which was my 4th transfer of an embryo, it worked and I got pregnant and everything was perfect. So I don't know. You know, that's kind of my journey. It was definitely not as planned. The fibroid was definitely a curveball. Um, and, you know, it was nothing I'd ever anticipated. I think as you get older, fibroids become more and more common. And I was over 40. So, you know, I'm not sure that the fibroid had been there for my whole, you know, womanhood, but it was definitely a problem. Periods were getting heavier and heavier, and a little bit more painful. And so there was that as well, that I had to decide, you know, like, hey, even if I don't end up being a mother, this fertility issue, even if I put that on the side, the fibroid was still causing me problems
Mm.
every month. So from that standpoint, that also weighed into my decision to do this major surgery, because it's a big surgery. You know, I mean, it's a major surgery. Um, and I think too, in terms of recovery, I only had one, and mine was laparoscopic. But that's important as well to understand. You know, it is a big surgery. I was pretty healthy and I bounced back pretty quick. But I would say, you know, you have to give yourself 2 weeks. And when you're talking about fertility, that also comes into play,
Yeah.
because after you've had a fibroid removed, there's another timeout period. And most clinics will make you wait at minimum 3 months, sometimes 6 months, before you can try or make another attempt. Um, the other thing I will tell you, this was a fascinating, even with my clinical background.
Mm.
What I didn't realize is that it bought me an automatic C-section, um, because of the fibroid remove. Where it was, you know, I think, you know, if you think about it in terms of that, they went in and cut it out of the muscle. It makes that muscle a lot more fragile. So if you go into labor and that muscle starts contracting, there's more opportunity or possibility that it could rupture. So for that reason, I wasn't allowed to go into labor, and that set me back. And I panicked when I first heard that. In the end, it worked out really well for me, because I like to plan things, and it ended up being, once I got my mind wrapped around the C-section, it ended up being fine. Um, but yeah, because of that fibroid that I had removed, that also meant I had to have a C-section, so I couldn't go into labor. So that was also something that I didn't expect along the way. So
How did you find the experience as well? So, if you were to look back at yourself and what you went through, I mean, I'm guessing very happy that you had the it's myomectomy that you had,
yes,
is that
correct.
right? Yeah, yeah. Do you feel do you have feelings about that? Do you wish someone had talked to you about it earlier or suggested it? Or do you feel you kind of came to the conclusion of, I'm going to give this a go before you were given any advice to?
That's a great question. It's so hard to answer. I mean, looking back, I would have saved so much money and time if I'd done it from the beginning, I believe. But I don't know that we'll ever know that for sure. And I also understand from a provider standpoint, my physician and their team was trying to give me the best, opportunity, and why go through a major surgery if we didn't have to remove the fibroid with it being as small as it was. Um, so I don't know, but I will say this, that a lot of clinics, not all of them, if you have any type of fibroid, they don't care what it is, they won't do a transfer. And back in the day, I would have said that's just silly, especially after seeing the number of women that get pregnant with numerous fibroids that are very large. But after going through what I did, I can understand that. It's like, you want to create this perfect home for an embryo, and you want to remove all wild cards. So from that standpoint, looking back on my experience, I would probably tell somebody, just take it out. I mean, maybe one attempt, and then after that, then I'd remove it.
And your process, you started, you said with IUI, so that's where you started. And then after your myomectomy, what process did you go through fertility to conceive in that? Was it IVF that you were going through at that point, or?
Yeah, it was just a frozen
Yeah.
embryo.
Yeah.
So it was just a frozen embryo, but I think a good frozen embryo at the right time. I mean, I
Yeah.
always say this: it was the right embryo at the right time. So
Yeah.
and the right environment. So the uterus was finally, I think, free of any obstacles, and it just everything kind of was at the right time in the right place. So it just worked out. So yeah, at the end of the day, it was my journey. I'm glad that it was successful at the very end. It was a hard and long and expensive and a very emotional journey. But I do think that the fibroid played a role in some of it. Maybe not all of it, but some of it.
Do you have any general advice that if you were to talk to yourself back then or to women that are in a similar position to you now, do you have any advice as to different things that they can do? Because I think one of the things that we notice is sometimes in conversations about fertility, it feels like it, you know, people lose themselves somewhat because you become an object of so many different parts and
Yeah.
it can be such an emotional process. Do you have any advice or, I guess, yeah, things that you'd want to say either to past you or to people in a similar experience to you now?
It's funny. I've read some studies where it suggested or correlated that when a woman goes through infertility, it's similar to a woman going through treatment for cancer. Now, at the end of the day, it's more elective. So, I don't want to take away from that, the comparison or the correlation. But in terms of doctor's appointments, number of doctor's appointments, the emotional ups and downs, and that part I think is similar, or there's some correlations you can draw. And I only say that because you think, oh, it's just fertility, and I had a lot of friends that were in that same camp, and they kept saying, why do you keep doing this? If it's so hard and it's so expensive and it's not the right outcome, why do you keep doing this? And I think, unless you're sitting there and in my shoes or in the shoes of a woman who is having infertility issues and wants nothing more to be a mother, you just can't understand that. And at times it threatened some of my relationships with some of my friends because of that. So my biggest advice would be is to create a group of women that understand. And for me, that was my social media. And I started it really just to connect with people that were going through similar things. To add to this, I was also a single mother by choice, so I didn't have a partner. I just elected to do this on my own, and I tried to connect with women that were in that same situation. But along the way, I also found women that had fibroids or that had miscarriages or blighted ovums or and all these other things that I happened to go through on my journey. And for me, that was honestly the best outlet. I mean, some of these women that I connected with became kind of my virtual friends, and we kind of rooted for each other and watched each other go through the journey. And for me, that was the the biggest thing that was helpful. And I would say sometimes you have to do that because the people around you, even though they may know you the best, they don't understand the experience. And so you kind of have to create that environment yourself. And for me, I did that on Instagram. There's times now, 8 months after having my baby, that I think, do I still need that website? But I mean, so many people now that I connected with that have had babies, or in some, by the way, the path was different. It wasn't plan A, it wasn't plan B. They ended up having to adopt, or, there's all kinds of things, outcomes that were different. They weren't, for a lot of people, it's not what they started in terms of their initial plan. It took a turn, but in the end, they got a baby, and it's nice to be able to see these children and these babies grow up and these milestones, and to kind of cheer each other on